But first, it is officially spring, and we are out here on the Studio 5 Plaza, and we are celebrating by getting our hands a little dirty, and we are going to garden. We are bringing in Brian Lloyd with Olson's Greenhouse. Now, you're going to share with us some tips and tricks to gardening, but first we want to start with kind of the when can you start? We hear that we're supposed to wait until the last freeze, but is that true?
Everybody says that all the time, and it's true for certain things, but they're mainly talking about vegetables, and most vegetables you need to wait until the last freeze before you set them out. But when we're talking annuals and color, it's almost never too early to garden, Haley.
Okay, so let's kind of dive in here. You've got some beautiful arrangements for us, and some of them, or all of them I should say, that are ready to be planted now.
Yeah, exactly. You know, these are annuals and perennials, but the annuals, we call them hardy annuals, sometimes even tender perennials, because a perennial comes back year after year, but these are annuals like pansies. Pansies will come back each year, but we still call them a kind of a tender perennial because in the summer they die off, but they can take the cold this time of year, and so that's why they're perfect for March, perfect for early April. They give tons of color, they love the cool nights and the freezing temps. Every once in a while doesn't hurt them at all.
Okay, and this is great news because right now it seems you drive through a lot of neighborhoods and it's just kind of not that dead look, but just not a lot of color going on front porches. And so if we're looking for color options, let's go through a few of these and what our best bets are.
You know, that's the biggest thing I hear when I'm out in the garden centers this time of year. People always say, no, honey, it's too early. We're not spending our money on that yet, but it's not too early. In fact, it's optimal for these types of annuals and perennials. So we talked about pansies. They're the go-to annual this time of year that give you the most bang for the buck. If you forgot to plant them last fall, which you could have done, for the most beautiful pansies, you can plant them this time of year. Just space them a little bit more close together.
Okay, and I've heard some rumors that, you know, if you start planting too early with the very wet soil, it can compact the soil too much. Is that true or not?
It depends. If you have your soil amended, that's not a problem at all. As soon as you can work the soil, as soon as it's not muddy or frozen, you can plant early spring, cool season annuals.
Okay, and what's your recommendation on amended soils?
So anything with any organic matter, put as much as you can afford in is what I always like to say. The best rule of thumb is 2 inches of organic matter and work that down about 6 inches deep. So 2 inches of organic, anything like peat moss, compost, those types of things, and work them down 6 inches deep, and that'll help your soil so it's more workable earlier in the season. Okay,
so let's talk a little bit about pansies. If we plant them now, do we need to take them out later?
Yeah, they start looking bad when the heat comes. So usually the end of June, even sometimes the end of May, depending on how early we get hot. But I don't suggest waiting that long. Enjoy them in April and May, and then start putting your petunias in. So pansies are our early spring, and then petunias are late spring.
Okay, so let's take a look at this pot right here. Are there any special varieties that you want to point out?
Yeah, so the other one that's big this time of year are primrose. And primrose are great because you can put them on a windowsill inside. They're actually a perennial. A lot of the temples around have planted them last fall and are hoping for them to come back. But I think they're prettier when we grow them inside the greenhouse over the winter. And that makes them get these large blooms. And all you got to do is, whether you have them on the windowsill, once the bloom starts to fade, is deadhead it, and that'll encourage more new blooms to come. So simply pick off the old blooms, throw them away, and you're off to running with a new bud that'll come up. And there's several new buds within this plant that'll be coming up right behind. So primrose are perennials, but they look like an annual. They've got the amount of color that an annual has, and they're great for cool season weather.
Okay, and if we want a little variety in the height, that you've got some beautiful varieties back here. What are these?
Yeah, it's hard to find tall perennials or annuals this time of year, and so we go to perennials, and these are both perennials. Bleeding hearts, known for the heart-shaped flower that they have, are a staple this time of year. Always start to set their blooms in early April. We force these in the greenhouse, but you can find these in the garden center and put them in containers. And once you're done using them in the container, dig them up and put them out in the yard and enjoy them year after year. And then pincushion flower. This is an awesome one, I think. It's named for the look that it has, a little pincushion.
Yes.
Yeah, so a bunch of little pins are into the petals of the bloom, and that's a perennial. It'll come back, and it will bloom all season long through the summer. And so you can enjoy it in a container just like we have it here, and then dig it up and put it in the yard and keep enjoying it all year long.
Okay, and as people start to plant, if they're wanting to do a nice potted arrangement, is there any type of separation gaps they need to be thinking of? Do these get much bigger? How should they go about planting?
You know, it depends on what you're going for, Haley. If you want to let it fill in, that's a good rule of thumb, and you spend less money, but you spend more time waiting for it. And so what I like to do, especially with cool season plants this time of year, we're not going to get much more than 6 to 8 weeks of enjoyment out of them. So I say cram them in now. Get all the enjoyment you can now. So we've put a ton of plants in here. This was just planted up this morning, just like this, and it will look like this for at least 6 weeks, as long as you do the deadheading and things like that. So don't give space, I don't think, to early season plant containers and things like that. Now, if you're putting them in the yard, yes, you want to space them just like the tag says, 8 inches for pansies, things like that. But in a container, cram it full of color and enjoy it right away.
So in a pot like this, I mean, how many different varieties do you have of the pansies? And
so this is a 24-inch pot, and we actually have 6 or 7 different varieties of annuals and perennials in here. The bleeding hearts, pincushions, we have Shasta daisies in here, the primrose, the pansies. This is a little forget-me-not. And so I just mix and match textures of color and colors, different contrasting colors, and we probably have, in this 24-inch container, we probably have 25 plants.
So about 1 per inch.
Yeah.
Okay, let's draw our attention down to a couple of these too. What's the composition of these?
So this is just to show you can almost all colors go together this time of year. And so we're mixing pansies, primrose, and another pincushion flower. We've got the blue shades, the whites, we've got every shade of color. You almost can't go wrong. If you have a favorite color, make it a monocolor, monochromatic container and go with that. But if you can't pick your favorite color like I can't, just mix and match, and the amount of color is what stands out.
Is there any special tricks to keeping the colors vibrant? Does the vibrancy of them tend to dull at all?
Yeah, it does, and it's not really a trick that we can affect, but that's why they're cool season annuals. It's the cool temps at night that make these things pop. You can give them a little bit of fertilizer, and in a container you need to, but we're not looking for long-term, all summer long enjoyment here. And so even if you don't have time to fertilize, it's okay. You don't need to with cool season containers. They'll just do their thing with the amount of fertilizer that's built up inside the plant.
Okay, now you mentioned they like cooler temperatures. If we know there's going to be a hard freeze, do we need to cover them?
Yes, we do. And so frost is kind of weird. It can hit certain spots of our yard and not hit other spots. But the best thing to do is, if it's going to get below 32 degrees, that's okay for them. But into the 20s, that's when we want to start protecting them. So you can do several things. If it's a large container and you can't move it, simply put a sheet over it. Or if you have an overhang with your porch, that helps keep the frost off as well. If it's a smaller container, take it inside the garage for the night, but make sure you move it back out into the sunlight the next day as soon as you can. As soon as the temps are above 30, then it needs as much sunlight as it can get.
Perfect. And where can people find these varieties of flowers?
So we sell to all the Home Depots and Walmarts in the state, and you can get these varieties right away.
Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate the great spring ideas, and get some motivation to get out and start